Hi, welcome to Miss Richardson's 5-minute U.S. History Lectures. This information will be U.S. Notes 4.6, Post-World War II Asia. It includes information that aligns with the second section of your Unit 1 or Unit 4 study guide. Remember, you have control over the lecture, so pause whenever you need to, write down your questions, and rewatch as often as you need. And always make sure you're using that study guide to help you take your notes and get the right information. Let's go ahead and get started. In the last set of notes, you learned about the early Cold War policies in Europe. But you know that Asia was also involved in World War II and in the Cold War. So what policies and events happened in Asia? That's what we want to answer today. And in order to answer that, we have to know what happened in Asia following World War II. So as you already know, there was a lot of tension between the US and the Soviet Union in Europe after World War II. This tension actually bled into other parts of the world, in particular Asia, due to decisions that were made at the end of World War II. First, think about how the war ended in Asia. The Soviet Union had agreed to send troops to help the US fight against Japan after the war in Europe ended. China had been fighting against the Japanese with the US support. And the US ended the war in the Pacific by dropping 2 atomic bombs. That was meant to end the war sooner than anticipated. So there's your end of the war. This all changed the relationships and standing of countries in Asia. For example, in Japan, the US then established military bases of occupation following the Japanese surrender. Basically, this meant that the US military controlled the country at the end of World War II. So it was a US military government essentially in charge of Japan. General Douglas MacArthur was the leader of the occupying forces and therefore became the virtual dictator of Japan. He had almost complete control over governmental decisions made for Japan following World War II. This took away Japan's militaristic power and changed the dynamics of Asia considerably. At the same time, the US ally in Asia, China, was facing problems within their country. Many Chinese citizens were upset with the Chinese actions in the war, and they wanted new leadership. This allowed the Chinese Communist Party to rise following World War II in China. The Chinese Communists fought the Chinese government for control over the country. This is known as the Chinese Revolution. The United States aided the Chinese government to help them resist the Communists. So the Chinese nationalist government, the US was on their side against the Chinese Communists. Pop quiz. What policy does this idea fall under? The US stopping the spread of communism to a new area. Got it? You think you got it? Yep, containment. That's the answer. Even with the aid from the US, the Chinese Communists, led by Mao Zedong, and that's actually who you saw here, it's Mao Zedong in the back, or Chairman Mao, defeated the Chinese government in 1949, so the Communists won. The country then became communist, and the former government leaders that the US was backing were forced to flee the country and go into exile. The leaders fled to the island of Taiwan, which is right off the coast of China. With aid of the US, they maintained their seats in the United Nations so that even though they didn't actually have control of China, the US and others actually recognized them as the Chinese government. Kind of crazy, right? That was important to the US because if you remember, China is one of the permanent members of the UN Security Council, which means they have veto power. By supporting the disbanded Chinese government, the US guaranteed an ally in the UN at all times. And we kept more communist countries out of the Security Council and out of the UN. So I haven't told you about the Soviet Union's role in Asia yet, but it is important. And you'll hear about that in the next set of notes because this is the end of Notes 4.6. I hope you learned something and make sure you bring any of your questions to class. I'll see you then.